Chapter 16. Healing Waters. Bad Haxenfeld was one of the most famous spas in Europe. The mineral springs that gushed out of the rock at temperature of 50 degrees Celsius were supposed to cure almost every illness in the world. Heart disease and liver failure, rheumatism and bronchitis, anemia and dropsy and gout. All of these and many more, said the doctors at the spa, could successfully be treated. When the hot springs had first been found, many years ago, engineers had pumped the water into pipes and conduits and fed it into pools where patients could bathe, and treatment rooms where they could be squirted, and into fountains and taps in the pump room where they could drink. Things were done to people at Bad Haxenfeld which you might think people would pay not to have done to them. They were dipped into very hot water and very cold water, so they turned from pink to blue and back again. They had steam blown over their bodies. They were pummeled and massaged and lowered into tubs of evil-smelling mud. And every year the doctors invented new treatments, like blowing hot smoke into the patients' mouths to cure them of toothache, or fixed air pumps in their body to extract the rheumatism from their joints. You might imagine, therefore, that people would stay away, but you would be wrong. Rich people flocked to the place. They seemed to love being bullied by the doctors, and, whether they got better or not, they certainly thought they did, because they paid such amazing amounts of money. And round the baths, with their smell of hydrogen sulfide and clouds of steam, there sprang up luxury hotels and casinos and ballrooms and tennis courts and bandstands. Parks were planted with rare trees, winter gardens were built, fabulous shops and cafes opened, and at night music was played in the hotels and in the pump room, where people paid all over again to drink the water, which tasted so disgusting that it had to do them good. And it was here, in the largest and most expensive hotel of all, the Hotel Majestic, that Frau Eldraut's old uncle, the Baron Konrad von Keppel, now lived. Annika sat beside her mother in the carriage, with Hermann on the other side. Hermann hated missing his routine, but he wanted to practice shooting at the Bad Haxenfeld rifle range. There had been a surprise when the carriage clattered into the courtyard to pick them up. Instead of Wenzel driving, it was Zed. He got down to open the door for Annika and her mother, but wouldn't touch his cap to Hermann, and Hermann started to grumble as soon as they were on the road. "He ought to treat me with proper respect," he said angrily to his mother. "Hermann, leave it. I told you it wouldn't be for long," she said under her breath. And to Annika, "Zed helps my uncle when his own servant has the day off. He wheels him to the bathhouse and makes himself useful at the hotel." When they had driven for nearly an hour, the countryside began to change. There were hills now, and the colours of the ground grew richer. 10 minutes later, they had reached the town. Annika turned her head from left to right and back again, taking in the large exotic trees that lined the road, the luxurious villas and stately hotels. They passed a building with a brilliant gilded roof and a flight of steps leading up to an ornate door. When Annika asked what it was, her mother shuddered. "It's the casino," she said. "It's a dreadful place. People go there and gamble away all their money, and when they lose, they borrow more and start again." "There's a clump of trees at the back where people go to shoot themselves when they're ruined," said Hermann gleefully. But the people passing by in the promenade did not look at all as though they were going to shoot themselves. Even the ones in wheelchairs or walking with sticks seemed to be enjoying themselves. They passed chauffeurs washing limousines, and a uniformed porter crossing the road to the park with 5 dogs of assorted sizes on a long lead. No one at Bad Haxenfell had to walk their own dogs or look after their own motors. Then they drove through an archway and into the courtyard of the Hotel Majestic. And while Zed saw to the horses, they made their way into the building. Waves of warm air from the steam heating wafted towards them. There was the scent of potpourri from porcelain bowls in the hall. An orange tree grew in a tub by the reception desk. Winter was not allowed to trouble the guests of the Majestic. "Baron von Keppel is expecting you," said the head porter at the desk, and clicked his fingers for an underling to take them to the lift. The Baron did not get up when they came in. Getting up was something which took him a long time, because his joints were crippled and bent with arthritis. But he welcomed them jovially, and insisted on kissing not only his niece, but Annika. "Well, well, a pretty little thing, isn't she?" he said. "You've done well, Eltraut. Don't know why you kept her hidden all these years." Conrad von Keppel was the brother of Eltraut's mother. Even before he was struck down by illness, he must have been smaller and slighter than the von Tannenbergs. His hair was white, he smelt strongly of toilet water, and his blue eyes were keen and alert. He offered them wine and biscuits, but Frau Eldraut said she would go with Hermann to the rifle range and come back to the hotel in an hour to pick up Annika and take her to the lawyers. "Don't hurry back," said Uncle Conrad. "Annika can come with me to the baths. I'd like to be accompanied by pretty girls. You've brought the boy, I take it?" "Yes, he's downstairs. But don't keep her. Our appointment is at 11. Zed was waiting with the wheelchair, wearing an armband with the name of the hotel on it. Though he had refused to touch his cap to Hermann, he saluted the Baron respectfully, tucking a rug around his knees, and it was clear that he was used to working in the spa. He began to push the chair along the promenade towards the big bathhouse, and Annika walked beside him. Uncle Conrad seemed to know a great many people, and they stopped again and again while he was greeted by ladies in enormous hats, or men on horseback, or other invalids on their way to the baths, who stopped their chairs beside him. "That was Lady Georgina Fairweather," he said, after a very tall, willowy woman with a huge muff had greeted him. "You wouldn't think it, but her kidneys are in a dreadful shape, completely covered in fungus. They're putting her in the thermal effervescence. And that man in the bowler hat, he used to be the Dutch ambassador to the Solomon Islands, and when he was out there, he got an enormous tapeworm in his gut. They're trying to draw it out with hydrosuction, but pieces keep breaking off." Though she was sorry about Lady Georgina's kidneys and the tapeworm, Annika looked about her with pleasure, enjoying the elegant shop windows, the well-dressed people, the hanging baskets of greenery in the lampposts. This was a different world to Spittal. They were getting near the baths now, and the treatment rooms. The smell of hydrogen sulfide grew stronger, and more wheelchairs joined the procession. And now, coming towards them with towels round their necks, was a group of men, looking very clean and very damp. As they came closer, the Baron whispered, "Ah, the dentists. Delightful people. They're going home tomorrow. I shall miss them." Annika, too, was pleased to see the dentists, who had been at the station platform when she arrived. It made her feel established, as though she belonged. Not all the dentists were there. There were at least a dozen who had gone to the treatment rooms early and were now going into the town. They stopped by the Baron's chair, greeted him, and advised him to be careful about the water in the first of the hot pools. "The temperature's very high in there today," said a tall dentist with a moustache. "I'd miss that one out." "You wouldn't believe how much I've learned from them," confided the Baron when the dentists had wandered on in search of coffee and cakes. You see, when you're in the treatment rooms, there are only curtains between one cubicle and the next, and you can hear everything your neighbours are saying. Apparently, the Duke of Arnau bit right through the thumb of his dentist while he was doing a filling. And the new zinc treatment for gums is absolutely useless, but the patients go on begging for it. He shook his head. Next week it's undertakers, so I suppose I shall learn about coffins. But it won't be the same. There's always something so fascinating about teeth. He looked over his shoulder at Zed. Do you remember the jewellers who came at Christmas? 300, no less. And the stories they told make your hair stand on end. You don't have to lead Bad Hexenfeld to know everything that's going on in the world. They'd reached the entrance to the bathhouse. Only patients and their attendants were allowed beyond the entrance. Uncle Conrad's doctor came out of his office with a piece of paper listing details of the Baron's treatment for the day, and Zed wheeled him away down the long stone corridor. Don't forget, I'm expecting you for lunch, Uncle Conrad called to Annika over his shoulder, and she nodded and made her way back to the hotel. The office of Herr Bonn was comfortably furnished with a deep carpet, a large mahogany desk, a palm tree in a brass pot, and a clerk who led them in and begged them to be seated because Herr Bonn would be here in a minute. I was expecting him to be here already. Our appointment is for 11 o'clock. Frau Eldraut was not accustomed to being kept waiting and made this clear. The clerk went into the outer office and spoke to the typist, who went away to make coffee. Even when they had drunk it, there was no sign of the lawyer, and Annika saw that her mother was getting upset. The papers they were here to sign must be very important, and Annika, to reassure her, said, "But I am a von Tannenberg already, aren't I? I'm your daughter, and everyone knows it." Yes, yes, said Frau Aldertrout absently. All the same, things must be done properly. They waited for another half hour, and then the phone rang in the outer office, and presently the clerk came in. That was Herr Bonn. He is extremely sorry, but his wife has had a fit. He's had to take her to the hospital. A fit? How extraordinary. Doesn't he have servants to look after his wife? Yes, yes, but he says he'll be with you by 2 o'clock, without fail. I very much hope so, said Annika's mother. Otherwise he cannot expect to go on handling my affairs. Lunch in the dining room of the Majestic was very grand. Annika was put next to Uncle Conrad, and he had Eltraut on his other side. Hermann was in a bad mood. The gun they had given him at the rifle range had thrown to the left, and though he had explained this, they had refused to give him another one. Zed was not present, of course. Servants did not eat in the hotel dining room. Everyone spoke very quietly, and Uncle Conrad occasionally told them in a low voice what was wrong with the other guests. The lady on the next table had come in with an agonizing septic throat, which had turned out to be caused by a green bean wrapped around the root of her tongue. They had to give her chloroform to get it out, he whispered. Food was splendid. Venison broth, asparagus, beef in a pastry case, lemon soufflé with whipped cream. Annika had begun to wonder if there was a famine in Norland, but if there was, it had not reached Bad Haxenfeld. She would have enjoyed her meal more if she had not thought of Zed perhaps going hungry. Then, as the waiter came out with coffee, she had a glimpse into the busy, bustling kitchen. There, with his sleeves rolled up, was Zed, his face flushed by the heat. He was helping to load the trays and laughing at something one of the cooks had said. and he did not look hungry in the least. The lawyer was still not in his office when they returned after lunch. His clerk was grovelling, wringing his hand. Herr Bond sent word he will personally come to Spittal tomorrow with the necessary documents, at his own expense. I should hope so, said Frau Eltraut. Please tell him I am most displeased. But she looked more than displeased. She looked distressed and very worried. And Annika was puzzled. Why was this document so urgent? Surely nothing was going to happen to Herman for years, if at all. I shall go back to the hotel and rest, Frau Eltraut went on. If you like, you can go to the pump room. There's usually a band there. It doesn't cost anything to go and watch. I expect you back at the hotel at 4 o'clock. Annika heard the music coming out of the pump room before she reached it. A large domed building with a flight of steps flanked by statues. Inside there was a round hall with a fountain in the middle. People came up to it, gave some money to a lady sitting there, and were given a tin cup, which they took to the fountain to fill with spa water. The rest of the floor was filled by people parading up and down, nodding their heads to the music, greeting each other. The orchestra was an 8-piece band, and they were playing the kind of music Annika had grown up with in the streets and parks of Vienna. Waltzes, polkas, marches. She made her way closer to the orchestra and stood listening. The violins soared sweetly. The leader smiled at her, and she came closer and closer still. After a while, she felt a tap on her shoulder and turned to find a white-haired gentleman with a clean-shaven face and a paunch looking down at her. Would the Fräulein care to dance? He asked. Annika was startled. No one else was dancing, and in any case, one didn't dance with strangers. She was about to refuse when an elderly lady in a wheelchair propelled herself forward. This is my wife, said the old gentleman. She saw your feet tapping, and she thought you might like to waltz a little. The old lady nodded. As you see, I can't dance anymore. You should have seen us when we were young. Annika smiled and held up her arms. As she and the old gentleman twirled in a waltz, the spectators smiled too. And then a couple joined in, and another. The members of the band were delighted. When the music came to an end, they played another waltz, and another. Then she heard an angry voice calling her name. Zed was standing at the edge of the dancers, scowling at her. What on earth are you doing? He hissed, coming up to her. You know you don't dance with strangers. Annika flushed. This is Herr Dr. Feldkirch, she said angrily. Frau Feldkirch suggested we might like to dance. But Zed was in a temper. I'm supposed to fetch you. It's time to go home. What will your mother say? That depends on what you tell her. They walked back to the hotel in silence. Then Zed said, It's not even proper music they play there. Annika stopped and glared at him. What do you mean? It was lovely. It was proper Viennese music. Zed shrugged. If you like everything to be sickly and sweet. If you want real music, you should listen to the gypsies. How am I supposed to do that? She snapped. There aren't any gypsies anywhere near here. There might be soon. They come through sometimes, on their way to the spring fair at Stettin. If they do, I'll take you. It was the nearest she would get to an apology. In the carriage on the way back, Annika was sleepy and content, which was as well, since Herman grumbled all the way home about the men in the shooting gallery. They drove in twilight and then darkness. As the carriage went over the first bridge, Zed suddenly drew up. In the same moment, he extinguished the carriage lamp. "I think we should go back," he said in a low voice to Frau Eltraut. "There are people there. Look." They stared up at the courtyard of the house and saw lamps being carried round the building. They heard hammering on the door. "Come on, open up. We know you're there," somebody shouted, and hammering started again. Not burglars, then, as Annika had feared. "They're from the Land Bureau, I think," whispered Zed. "They've come in 2 automobiles." "Turn round at once," ordered Frau Eltraut. But Zed had already begun to turn the carriage in the only passing place, behind the bridge. "Where can we go?" "Thousand Woods," said Zed over his shoulder. "No one will find us there." They drove back the way they had come, past the turning to the farm, then down a narrow forest road which led away from Spittal into a dark thicket of spruce. "I'll kill them for this," muttered Herman. "When my father comes back, I'll kill them." "They won't stay long," said Zed. He had jumped down and gone to the horses' heads. They waited in the cold, silent woods for nearly 2 hours. To Annika, the hotel, the music at the spa, now seemed a distant dream. Who were those men who had tried to storm her mother's house? What was it that ailed Spittal? Would no one tell her the truth?